Thank you for joining us tonight on the Capitol Report on NTD Television, where we bring you the latest news straight from our nation's capital. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. Democrats on Capitol Hill this week are pushing forward in an uphill battle to pass national voting reform laws. We bring you more details on the Senate's progress. And President Biden visited Georgia to join the fight for new rules at the ballot box. But some Georgia voters say a speech from the president is not enough.
We don't need him to come to Georgia and use us as a prop. What we need is work.
United States Representative Marjorie Greene has now been officially banned on Twitter. We caught up with the Georgia Congresswoman to find out if she's been given a reason. Secretary of State Antony Blinken slams Beijing sanctions against 4 U.S. commissioners on international religious freedom. President Biden is renewing his push for new voting measures. He traveled to Atlanta today, delivering a major speech on the issue.
Pass the Freedom to Vote Act. Pass it now.
Biden's remarks took place in the late Congressman John Lewis's district. He is urging the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Democrat leaders are considering what some are calling the nuclear option, changing filibuster rules to pass these laws, a change President Biden endorses.
We have no option but to change the Senate rules, including getting rid of the filibuster for this.
Before Biden's visit, a coalition of voting rights groups in Georgia announced that they wouldn't attend Biden's events.
But at this point, we don't need another speech. We don't need him to come to Georgia and use us as a prop. What we need is work.
They say Biden hasn't done enough to advance their cause. Democrat senators on Capitol Hill are facing an uphill battle this week to get this voting rights bill to Biden's desk. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer today said he'd bring it to the floor as early as tomorrow. But will there be a breakthrough? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports for us.
It's a voting rights showdown here on Capitol Hill this week. The House has already passed 2 Democrat-backed voting rights bills, and now the Senate is working to push it over the finish line. But facing Republican opposition, it's unlikely that it will meet with success.
It is my intention to once again bring legislation to the floor to fight back against the threats to democracy and protect people's access to the ballot.
His argument is that somehow state legislatures across the country are busily at work trying to make it more difficult for people to vote. Of course, that's not happening anywhere in America.
Democrats argue that the voting rights bills passed in many Republican states make it harder for voters, especially Democrat voters, to cast their ballots. That's why Schumer is bringing to the floor the Freedom to Vote Act. It would extend early voting, making Election Day a national holiday, combat dark money in campaigns, set a national standard for mail-in ballots, and make voter ID more flexible.
The Senate is going to act as soon as tomorrow.
Democrats in D.C. say it's their job to protect voters by overriding the newly passed election laws like the ones in Georgia. Georgia resident Garland Favorito has been working to restore election integrity for 16 years with his organization, Voter GA. He tells us he's opposed to the national level law because every state has their own challenges to solve.
It doesn't really address what Georgia needs. Georgia specifically needs verifiability, more audit capabilities. We need transparency in elections, which is huge, and then recount capabilities. The bill doesn't really even address that much.
So, Melina, with all of this attention Democrats and President Biden are putting on this election reform law, does it look like it's going anywhere?
It does not look like there has been any breakthroughs when it comes to the Senate side passing this voting rights bill. It does need 60 votes to pass, and that's going to be a problem with lack of Republican support. And Senators Manchin and Sinema are still strongly rejecting the idea to change the Senate rules in order to pass the voting rights bill, although they do support the voting rights bill itself. They're just skeptical of changing the rules to do it. Now, at the same time, there is a group of bipartisan senators working on a more modest voting rights bill, but the question is, is, would that scaled back version get enough support in both chambers in order to become law? We asked the Democratic caucus chairman today if Democrats in the House would be willing to support a more scaled back voting rights bill in order to have at least some of their priorities passed. Here's how he responded. I'm wondering if Democrats in the House would be willing to push through something more modest just for the sake of trying to push forward the voting rights agenda.
If we reach a point in time where the Senate, for whatever the reason, is unable to break through the filibuster, which they should deal with, and invoke cloture, then I'm happy at that point in time to evaluate what the other alternatives are, but we're not at that point right now.
So they will be working on debating this bill over on the Senate side all week, but we should be able to see how this vote unfolds by the end of the week. Steve?
Thanks for that, Melina. And New York City is facing backlash for their new voting law that allows non-citizens to cast ballots. The Republican National Committee is suing New York City Mayor Eric Adams over the new law that, if allowed to take effect, would let about 800,000 non-citizens in New York City vote in local elections. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has been a vocal critic for many things, two of which are vaccine mandates and big tech censorship. Well, Twitter permanently banned the Congresswoman, and we had a chance to talk to her about it. Let's take a look. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks for having me.
Congresswoman, we're in Washington, D.C. right now. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, her mandates are set to go into effect on Saturday, I believe it is, on the 15th. What type of effect do you think this is going to have on small businesses in the city?
I think it's absolutely destructive. I'm a small business owner myself. That's in construction for almost 20 years before I became a member of Congress. And what she is doing to restaurants, to gyms, to many stores, many small businesses here in Washington D.C. I think it's communism. These mandates are completely unconstitutional. There is no reason for them. The death rates are not showing that COVID is a danger. The real danger to Americans and to people right here in Washington D.C. is that our government will not allow them to have access to treatments at work like ivermectin, monoclonal antibodies, many of the treatments that frontline doctors recommend. Those are the life-saving treatments, and that's the best way to handle COVID at this point. Not mandates, not shutdowns, not continued masking, and definitely not vaccine passports.
Now, Congresswoman, you've been a very vocal critic, obviously, of a lot of these mandates and other things that have taken place throughout the pandemic. You were recently banned from Twitter. They did not give you, as far as I know, any specific reason, and they did not cite any specific tweet. Has anything changed since you've been banned? Have they let you know why?
No, they haven't let me know why, but statements in the press, like the New York Times, said that it was for COVID misinformation. But here's the problem. No one elected Twitter. Twitter is completely unelected, and they're not a branch of our government. I, however, am elected. I'm an elected member of Congress, and I serve and represent a district of over 700,000 Americans. But Twitter silenced my voice, completely silenced my voice in political speech. I shared information. If it is COVID misinformation, I shared it from the CDC.gov website, from the VAERS reporting system reporting vaccine injuries. And I basically was saying before COVID, we didn't have reports of deaths with any vaccines like this. There were only some. But now after COVID, there are thousands and thousands of reports of deaths associated with the COVID vaccines. The reason why I was talking about that is instead of enforcing mandates and to the point where people are getting fired from their jobs, that started today through OSHA. This is happening. People are getting fired from their jobs, kicked out of the military, kicked out of colleges, not allowed opportunities in life because they're unvaccinated. Then why isn't our government willing to at least investigate these deaths, thousands and thousands of deaths reported on the VAERS system? But Twitter thinks that's misinformation. Unelected Twitter is completely stepping out of line. I think they're attacking our government by kicking a elected member of Congress, me, off of their platform. They've already done it with a sitting president, Donald J. Trump. Twitter's the one that has problems. Twitter is the one that's completely out of line.
When it comes to big tech, What is the real solution? I mean, obviously Section 230 hasn't been working or moving forward. What do you think is the true solution to put big tech in check?
Well, I'm a realist. Republicans did nothing about it when they had full control. I wasn't here yet, but they did nothing about it under President Trump, and they had the opportunity. So I think that was a major failure. Here's the truth. We're hopefully going to take back the House in 2022 and have a majority, but we'll still have a Democrat in the White House. So we have to win the House, we have to win the Senate, and we have to win the White House before anything really can be done and signed into law. They can do investigations, well, that's what we can do, but will anything really change? No, I don't think anything will change until at least 2025, if we have a Republican-controlled majority. What I have been telling people to do is don't sit in that restaurant eating that really bad food, putting up with that really bad service, and being treated badly. You get up and leave. And on Twitter, Republicans are treated horribly, constantly censored, constantly kicked off. What my conference needs to do, and I am publicly asking them, and I will be asking them this week, is I'm asking all Republicans, elected Republicans, to leave Twitter and to do it on behalf of their constituents, to do it on behalf of conservatives who've been kicked off for years now, do it on behalf of their Republican voters, because everyone's tired of it. And if our Republican conference would take that bold action and leave Twitter, that makes Twitter powerless to censor anyone. And that's how you handle a bully that won't take their hand off of your mouth.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, thank you.
Thank you.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell acknowledged today that high inflation is a serious threat to the U.S. job market. He also promised the Fed will raise interest rates more than it plans to, if needed, to curb surging prices.
If we see inflation persisting at high levels longer than expected, then we will, if we have to raise interest rates more over time, we will. We will use our tools to get inflation back. High inflation is a severe threat to the achievement of maximum employment and to achieving a long expansion that can give us that.
President Biden nominated Powell to lead the Federal Reserve for another 4-year term. During the Senate confirmation hearing, Powell said that to get a strong labor market, it's going to take a long economic expansion, and to achieve that, price stability is needed. Inflation in the U.S. is at a 39-year high. Consumer prices rose by 6.8% in November compared to just a year ago. And the unemployment rate fell in December to 3.9%, the lowest level since February 2020. Fed officials forecast 3 increases to their benchmark short-term rate this year. Such increases typically lead to higher rates on many consumer and business loans and slower economic growth. But Powell is now more worried about the damage that rising inflation could inflict on the job market. Congressman Ed Perlmutter of Colorado is going to retire before the 2022 midterm elections. He becomes the 26th Democratic Congress member to do so. Most of these retirements have come from the House of Representatives. Republicans are expected to present a fierce challenge to the Democrats' House majority in November. In the Senate, Democrats have a more favorable election map. Only one Democratic senator has announced his retirement. Some are speculating that the growing list of retirements could mean even greater difficulties for Democrats in the elections. During a speech announcing his retirement, Perlmutter said that despite the challenges, he expects Democrats to win. Perlmutter himself would have likely faced a sizable challenge if he were to run again. The National Republican Congressional Committee considers his seat highly vulnerable. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday that the U.S. remains undeterred by Beijing's sanctions against 4 members of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. In his statement, Blinken said that China's sanctions are another affront against universal rights, and the U.S. stands in solidarity with the Commission members and staff. Blinken also called on Beijing to cease its acts of transnational repression, which undermine the international rules-based order. Beijing barred entry to those 4 commissioners in December. It is seen as a retaliation to U.S. sanctions placed on dozens of Chinese Communist Party officials and entities over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Hospitalizations for the CCP virus hit a record high, with nearly 146,000 Americans being treated. The United States is also reporting a record number for the most cases in a single day. As the Supreme Court gets set to decide whether the Biden administration's vaccine mandates are going to stay or be shut down, we seek perspective on the possibility of both outcomes. The bitter standoff between Chicago officials and the city's teachers union finally comes to an end. Students will go back to in-person learning on Wednesday, and teachers are back today. A congresswoman calls for empowering parents, not the teachers union. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. Today, more Americans are in the hospital with the CCP virus than ever before. Data shows the U.S. set a new record for hospitalizations. Nearly 146,000 people are being treated in hospitals for the CCP virus. It surpasses the previous high set in January 2021. The U.S. reported a single-day record of 1.5 million new cases on Monday. The number of children in hospitals with the CCP virus also reached a new high, with nearly 5,000 pediatric patients. Experts say not every patient was hospitalized because of the virus. Some tested positive while in the hospital for other issues. The CDC and the State Department on Monday issued a do not travel warning for Canada amidst the Omicron variant surge across North America. The Supreme Court is set to give a ruling on President Biden's vaccine mandates. We had a chance to sit down with attorney Rob Hennicky, who has been on the front lines of this battle, to find out where things stand and where they might go. Here's a look at our interview. Rob Hennicky, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Rob, if you could just get us up to date right now. The Supreme Court is hearing the arguments for Biden's vaccine mandates. What's at stake?
Certainly. Recently, you had the arguments on the emergency motions to the Supreme Court to stay the vaccine mandates by the Biden administration applicable to private employers and also applicable to healthcare workers. And because both of those vaccine mandates go into effect and begin to be enforced here in short order, I expect the Supreme Court to rule quickly. And at least based on the questions and feedback from the justices during argument, I feel there's a very good chance that the court will step in and stop these mandates from being crammed down the throats of the American people.
Now, you just said there's two different things they're going to be ruling on. Do you anticipate them to rule on, in favor of the people in both areas here?
I think they will. I think the court, as it's been inclined to do, is going to rule on some very narrow textual readings of the statute that the Biden administration claims gives it authority under the Medicaid-Medicare Act to require healthcare workers to be vaccinated, and under OSHA to require that employees be vaccinated, the statutes that were written decades ago that never contemplated this. And so I expect the court to look very critically at the statutes the Biden administration claims for authority, and for the court to find that those statutes do not give that power to each of those agencies. Now, it'll be a win in striking down the vaccine mandates, but in some ways is going to miss the forest for the trees if the court does not address the greater constitutional issues that are in play in terms of federal power.
Now, what happens if you lose?
I think if the court goes the wrong way, we are really at a major tipping point in terms of our country. Maybe for the first time this serious since the pandemic began. I think the outcome of the court goes the wrong way will be near catastrophic for the American industry and economy. I mean, we had a taste of it during the Biden supply chain crisis towards the end of last year. But if you look at the percentage of people, for whatever personal legitimate reasons they have for not taking the vaccine, and if you take that workforce out of the American economy and see the impact on trucking, transportation, our ports, our supply chains, our nursing homes, our healthcare facilities, even a 10 to 15% elimination of that workforce will have a serious disruption to our ability to access goods and services, much more dramatic than we had a taste of at the end of last year.
Now, this is obviously a very, pressing issue, and there's a lot of, emotion on both sides of the argument. When it comes to the justices that are going to make their ruling, do you ever get concerned that sometimes they might not follow their, their heart, their intuition, and follow the path of least resistance as in terms of, what type of pushback they'll get from the general public?
I do, and in a couple ways. I mean, first of all, from the recent arguments, you heard the comments by Justice Sotomayor, for example, that were completely fabricated statistics and gross exaggerations of the true data involving COVID-19. I mean, she was fact-checked as 4 Pinocchios by the Washington Post for these pronouncements she made from the bench that were completely untrue. And so it seems to me that her personal emotion on the issue is causing her, to look more into, sensational websites on the internet rather than the law books and the controlling precedent that should guide her. On the other standpoint, you have some of the more right-of-center justices that seem reluctant to want to take on the greater constitutional issues. And there's some foundational issues about whether it's even constitutional for the federal government to do this in the first place, more so than just whether a specific statute says that it's okay. And my concern is that if the court just rules on the limited textual statutory arguments, that it's going to just be causing this kind of whack-a-mole, where the federal government will continue to come back and try to find other ambiguous language and antiquated statutes to try to claim the authority it's been grabbing, where the court now, for once and for all, could really resolve these questions by looking to the text of the Constitution as it limits the federal government.
Rob Henneke, thank you.
Thank you.
The American Red Cross declared a national blood crisis on Thursday. They noted a 10% drop in donations since March 2020, largely due to the pandemic. Doctors have to make difficult choices about who receives blood transfusions. The Red Cross, which supplies 40% of the nation's blood, has also had to limit its distributions to hospitals. The organization encourages people to donate blood, especially those with type O blood. They're noting that blood can only be made available through the kindness of volunteer donors. Chicago officials in the city's teachers union finally came to an agreement late Monday after nearly a week of negotiations. The bitter standoff has canceled classes for 5 days. Neither side immediately disclosed full details of the proposal on Monday evening, but leaders generally said the agreement included metrics to close individual schools and plans to boost district COVID-19 testing.
Our goal throughout this entire process was to both get our students back to in-person learning as quickly as possible and prevent work disruptions for the rest of the school year.
As a mother of 4 children, Congresswoman Lisa McClain calls for giving parents truth, transparency, and consistency. She wants parents to be empowered, not the teachers union.
And what we are doing to our children by not allowing them to go back to in-person learning is devastating to our children, their mental health, and I'm going to argue to their future.
The deal would have students back in schools on Wednesday and teachers back today. It still requires approval with a vote of the union's roughly 25,000 members. The decision to homeschool is largely due to the pandemic. Many students had poor experiences with virtual learning and wanted an alternative. More parents were also available to homeschool their children. Another concern is critical race theory and other leftist ideologies being taught in public schools. In December, some parents protested against the Loudoun County School Board and left 650 shoes outside their office building. The move could mean that more parents were considering leaving the public school system. Now, Virginia has the 3rd highest percentage of homeschoolers in the country. For 22 months, longer than any time in the nation's history, the United States Capitol has been closed to most visitors. What is the biggest hurdle to reopening the Capitol building to the public?
The staffing is the biggest issue. We are 400 and around 440, 450 officers below where we need to be.
Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger testified Tuesday before the House Appropriations Subcommittee. He said the equipment and operational planning will be ready for reopening. At the onset of the pandemic, the Capitol building closed its doors to visitors on March 12, 2020. Some lawmakers said it's time to find a way to let the public back in. That's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Steve Lance, and we'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest news direct to you from our nation's capital. Thank you for watching, and have a great evening.